Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Well, it's Thursday, so it's time for another freight market update to see what's going on in the trucking industry. I am changing the format a little bit, but we'll still look at general volumes, rejections, diesel prices, and then we'll take a deep dive into the spot market for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds. And at the end of this video, we're going to talk about data versus experience. Ready? Let's go! All right, let's take a look at the general market altogether at first. I know it's going to be a different format, but still pretty much the same information. So first of all, we'll look at the general volume in the industry for all equipment types. And the general volume has increased by 1.26% week over week. Rejection rates were 5.35% last week, and now they're 6.88%, a 28.6% increase week over week. Now let's go to the spot market for a minute. What happened to the volume for all equipment types on the spot market? That also increased by 3% week over week, and spot rates actually saw a 3-cent increase if we're taking into consideration everything: flatbeds, reefers, dry vans, specialized equipment. It has seen an increase week over week by 3 cents. All right, so now let's take a look at the diesel map. The darker an area is, the more expensive diesel is in that area or in that state. And as you can see, California, Washington, and Pennsylvania, they're all over $4 per gallon on average. The cheapest places to get diesel are Texas and Oklahoma, which have less than $3.20 per gallon. Where do I get this info? I get it on AAA. I think this map is important because it will give you an idea of where to stick to or where to refuel as you make your runs. Now, speaking of diesel prices, let's go into a little bit more detailed information. Right now, the average diesel price is $3.59 per gallon, according to AAA. Now you can see below it what it was a week ago, a month ago, and a year ago, but the important part is to look to the right of the price today. Week over week, diesel prices did see a tiny decrease, less than a cent. Month over month, they're down by 8 cents, and year over year, diesel prices are actually down 44 cents. So we're moving in the right direction in terms of diesel prices. All right, now let's get into specifics for the spot market when it comes to the different equipment types. And we're going to start with dry vans. This data I get from FTR Intel. And as you can see, week over week in general for dry vans, they saw another decrease, about 1 cent per mile lower than last week. Year over year, rates are about 2% lower. Volumes week over week also saw a decrease by 2.3%, and year over year, they're down 14% on the spot market. So now, instead of using sonar in order to figure out what's happening on the spot market, I decided to use truck stop data and create maps. So let's take a look. This map shows where there are more loads on the spot market for dry vans. The darker an area is, like Texas, for example, with over 2,000 loads in that state, the more loads come out. But something you will see is that most loads are in the South and the Midwest, as well as some of the East Coast. California is also on that list. Now, what about capacity? Well, capacity, same principle applies. The darker an area is, the more capacity in that state. Texas has over 2,000 trucks. And just like with flatbeds, like I always say, capacity tends to stick to the areas where there are more loads. All right, now load to truck ratios. Anything burgundy red is severe overcapacity, and that's the Pacific Northwest, New Mexico, Colorado, Florida, Connecticut. Those places have less than half a load per truck on the spot market, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to negotiate. But because this is by state, you have to remember there are going to be areas within that state that might pay a little bit better, and you might have a little bit more negotiating power. Now, anything red, like North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, still over capacity, still less than a load per truck. Anything orange, which is a lot of the map, this is about equilibrium, about 1 to 1.5 loads per truck. Anything yellow, Arkansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, slight under capacity, 1.5 to about 2 loads per truck. And Massachusetts is the only place with moderate under capacity, 3 to 10 loads per truck. However, the best place to be in, it's definitely not Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is a relatively small state surrounded by a ton of areas with overcapacity. So the rates there are not going to be good. If you want to stick to better areas for dry vans, I recommend sticking to those in the Midwest, because a lot of those areas have more or less equilibrium, which means that people are not going to be deadheading far for their next load. And that means that you might be able to get a slightly better rate than is posted. All right, now let's talk about reefers using FTR Intel's data. Unfortunately, reefers week over week again saw a decrease of 2 cents per mile, which brings reefers to an average of $2.08 per mile on the spot market. It's horrific. Rates year over year are down 6%. Although volumes week over week did increase year over year, however, volumes are down 15%. So where are the loads for reefers? Well, again, most of the loads are in Texas. There are between 1,000 to 2,000 loads there. California, Pennsylvania, Illinois, those are areas where there are more loads. Where there are less than 100 loads is the Northeast, as well as a lot of the plain states like Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming. What shocked me is that Oregon is also kind of dead for reefers. Now, what about capacity? Well, capacity does in general tend to stick to where the loads are, but not always. Like a lot of reefers end up in Georgia, Florida, and this is just because that's where the loads go. So reefers are definitely, it's hard to find a load that takes you from a better market to a better market. Now, let's take a look at the load to truck ratio. Again, anything burgundy red, which is the plain states, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, New Hampshire, this is severe overcapacity. There's less than half a load per truck. Anything red, which is the West Coast, which is interesting, still overcapacity, still less than a load per truck. Orange is equilibrium, more or less. There's about 1 to 1.5 loads per truck. Again, be careful because sometimes brokers, they will post one load several different times. So it might be skewed a little bit. Anything yellow, Iowa, Kansas, Arkansas, that is slight under capacity, 1.5 to 2 loads per truck. Green, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin is under capacity, 2 to 3 loads per truck, but be careful, stick closer to the Minnesota side, right? Like Fargo, North Dakota, for example. And Idaho is the place with moderate under capacity, 3 to 10 loads per truck. This has been true for a while now. Now, if you're wondering where are the better areas to be in, I would say, again, your safest bet is always the Midwest. If you're able to stick within the Midwest, you are going to be doing slightly better than running from a place like, I don't know, Idaho to Florida, and then getting stuck in Florida trying to deadhead out and losing all of that money. All right, now finally, let's talk about flatbeds in general. Flatbeds actually saw another increase of 3 cents per mile on the spot market. Year over year, rates are 2.4% higher. Volumes week over week also went up by 6.8%, and they're 34% higher on the spot market than this time last year. All right, now in terms of loads, where are the loads? Well, nothing really changes. The loads are mostly in the South as well as the Midwest, as well as the East Coast. A lot more loads in the East Coast now for flatbeds. California also has a few loads there. Now, capacity, for the most part, follows where the loads are, right? Texas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, they kind of follow where the loads are. There's not too much capacity in a state like Wyoming, though. But what is the load to truck ratio here? Well, again, anything burgundy red is severe overcapacity, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, etc. Anything red, which still has less than a load per truck, is like Texas, Oklahoma. It's pretty much the majority of the map. Equilibrium is places like Minnesota, Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, about 1 to 1.5 loads per truck. Slight under capacity is California, Massachusetts, and Maine, 1.5 to 2 loads per truck. Green is under capacity, Louisiana and Maryland, and moderate under capacity is Arkansas, Mississippi, and Alabama. Something that I have noticed week over week is a lot of states got downgraded, kind of, because Washington got worse, Mississippi got worse. In general, it got downgraded, but something to note, just because a state is red, like over capacity, like Illinois or Wisconsin or Indiana, doesn't mean that you can't get a decent rate per mile there. You can if you're ready to take a load with tarps or 12 chains, 12 binders, crushed cars, right? You still can get a decent load. It sometimes will take you to a worse area, which is the big thing. But I know that in the Midwest, you can get a decent rate per mile if you're ready to go to a place that might not be that good, or if you're willing to do things that a lot of people try to avoid, like 8-foot tarps, chains, binders, or if you have pipe stakes, which is something that is rare. Basically, if you set yourself apart from the competition, yeah, you can still get a more or less decent rate per mile, and you can negotiate. Now, before we move to data versus experience, something that I really encourage you guys to do is to take a look at those maps again, specifically the load maps, to see where there are more loads. Because something that I have realized is sometimes, even though a place might have a bad load to truck ratio, if there are a lot of loads, you do have negotiating power if you're willing to wait. Because what usually happens is people panic book in the morning, which leaves some loads later in the day without enough capacity. And that's where the negotiating power is. So if you're not 100% sure of where to go, always look for the place which has more loads. This is especially true for reefers, which are, I mean, you have to expedite that freight, right? Those are perishable goods for the most part, unlike flatbeds, which have like a week to ship out. And this gives you more negotiating power later in the day if you are willing to wait for it. Now, data versus experience. Honestly, my experience this week as a flatbed carrier has been pretty similar to what the data is showing. We have been able to stick to the Midwest. We haven't even touched the South. It was all the Midwest. Are there a ton of loads that you just pick and choose from the load board? No, of course not. But there is negotiating power in the Midwest right now for flatbeds, as long, again, as you're willing to do work that other people kind of shy away from. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. That's all I have for you. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week and weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.